3 disturbing true camping horror stories. Welcome to DTC, Dark Timeless Creep, where we delve into chilling and eerie true stories that will send shivers down your spine. Today, we're venturing into the world of camping horror, where the serenity of nature turns into a nightmare. Strange occurrences and unexplainable events await as we explore 3 disturbing tales that happened to campers. Prepare yourself for stories that will make you question what lurks in the shadows and leave you wondering if it's truly safe to sleep under the stars. Let's begin this terrifying journey. Story 1. The terrifying camping trip at Twin Beach. About 3 years ago, in late November, my husband and I experienced something so unsettling that it still makes us uneasy every time we think back on it. At the time, we were living in Seattle, and like most weekends, we enjoyed heading out to the coast to surf at our favorite spots like Naya Bay or Westport. But this particular weekend, the forecast was bad. There were strong waves and stormy weather along the coast. We were disappointed, but we decided to look for another place to surf, hoping we could find somewhere safer to ride the waves. After some discussion, we decided to head towards the Juan de Fuca Strait. The land around the strait is beautiful, but it's also remote and isolated. The only way to get there is to drive along Highway 112, the road that runs from Port Angeles to Naya Bay. The thing about Highway 112 is that it's mostly devoid of cell service, and there are just a few tiny towns scattered along the way. We figured we could stop at a spot called Twin Beach, somewhere we had visited before and were familiar with. Our plan was to arrive the night before to catch the good waves early in the morning, but because of the cold November weather, we didn't want to pay for a campsite. Instead, we decided to park along Twin Beach and spend the night in the car, hoping for a peaceful night by the shore. We arrived around 3:30 p.m. and the only other vehicle in sight was a camper van parked near the beach. There was a young couple inside, but everything seemed normal at first. We got settled and made dinner, and I took a short walk along the beach just before sunset. That's when we heard it, a loud whistle in the distance. We both turned toward the sound, and there was a man walking down the road that led to the beach. It was strange. Highway 112 is hardly a walking path, and there's really nothing out there, just thick woods on one side and the ocean on the other. It felt off, and I couldn't help but feel uneasy. As he walked down the beach, he waved to the couple in the camper van. They invited him to join their campfire, and the last time we saw them, they were chatting and laughing by the fire as the sun dipped below the horizon. My husband and I decided to go to bed around 8 p.m. About an hour later, I woke up to a strange feeling. I cracked the car window slightly to get some fresh air, and I noticed something odd. The camper van was gone. I couldn't explain it. Just moments earlier, I had seen the couple by the fire, and now they had vanished. A cold, unsettling sensation crept over me, but I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. But when I woke again around 11 p.m., it wasn't exhaustion, it was something else. My husband was awake too, sitting quietly, listening to something outside. I asked him what was wrong, but he whispered that someone was knocking on our car window. My heart raced. I was wide awake now, terrified. Why would someone be knocking on our window at this hour in the middle of nowhere? I wanted to scream, but all I could do was sit there frozen. My husband stood up and we both gathered ourselves. He decided to check outside and I stayed in the car, shining the flashlight across the beach. The sound of waves crashing was the only thing we could hear until we heard something else. The wind rustling through the trees and footsteps. Slowly, he came back, his face pale. "We need to leave now," he said, his voice shaking. Something was wrong. He had spotted a car parked on the road, just sitting there with its headlights off, engine still running. We didn't waste any time. We threw our things in the back of the car, got in, and drove off. But in the rush of it all, my husband made a wrong turn, heading toward Naya Bay instead of Port Angeles. As we drove, the sense of dread only grew, And then we saw it again. The same car, this time with its headlights on, creeping up behind us. My pulse raced as I realized what was happening. The car was following us. There was no doubt about it now. The road was narrow, surrounded by dark trees on one side and the crashing waves of the ocean on the other. My husband floored the gas pedal, pushing the car as fast as it could go. This is it, I thought. We're being hunted. We hit 90 miles per hour as we sped down the road, trying to outrun the car that was gaining on us. My husband swerved the wheel, trying to find any way to lose the tail. Thankfully, we found a small parking lot ahead and turned off onto a side road, hoping to lose the car. We stopped for a second, trying to catch our breath, but when we looked back, the car was still there, waiting, its headlights burning through the night. We drove as fast as we could, heart pounding in our chests, not daring to look behind us. I thought for sure the car would catch up, that we'd be trapped out there on the road. But by the time we reached Port Angeles, the car had disappeared. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The terror of the night lingered in the air like a fog, and we didn't feel safe until we were back in the city. Even now, every time I think about it, that feeling of being hunted never quite leaves me. What started as a simple camping trip turned into something far darker, something we couldn't explain, something that we both felt in our bones. We never went back to Twin Beach, and I don't think we ever will. Sometimes I wonder who was in that car, and more terrifyingly, why they were following us. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 2. A terrifying experience in the forest. For as long as I can remember, my older brother, 2 years my senior, has always been my trusted companion for every outdoor adventure. We spent countless hours together exploring, camping, and challenging ourselves. Whether it was setting up camp, riding BMX bikes, hunting, or trekking through dense forests, we were always by each other's side. Over the past few years, we have traveled across the country, venturing into deep caves, climbing mountains, and even scaling rock walls. But it was one trip in the summer of 2022 that would leave us questioning everything we thought we knew about nature. We had decided to venture into a remote, isolated forest that we had never explored before. The area was far off the beaten path, and the narrow dirt roads leading in seemed to disappear into the wilderness. After a long drive, we set up camp in the heart of the forest, surrounded by towering trees and thick underbrush. The sense of isolation was immediate. This was no ordinary camping trip. There was an eerie quiet about the place, a stillness in the air that made it feel as though the forest was holding its breath. We shrugged it off, chalking it up to being out of our element, but little did we know that night would shatter our sense of reality. By nightfall, we had settled into our tents, and the forest around us seemed to settle into an unnatural silence. As I lay there, listening to the occasional rustling of leaves, I was struck by how different this place felt compared to other forests we had visited. The air was thick, heavy with an energy I couldn't quite place. Suddenly, around 4:30 in the morning, I was jolted awake by a sound that immediately set my nerves on edge. At first, I thought it was the wind, or perhaps a branch brushing against the side of my tent, but as the noise persisted, I realized it was something far more deliberate. It was as though something or someone was striking the side of my tent with rhythmic force. Thud, thud, thud. I lay perfectly still, trying to make sense of it, but the more I listened, the more unnerving it became. The sounds were faint but distinct, like someone tapping at the tent from the outside. I hesitated, unsure whether to venture outside or stay hidden. I finally decided to wake my brother, and when he entered my tent, his face was pale, his expression a mixture of confusion and dread. He told me he had heard something far worse, a woman's laughter echoing from deep within the woods. It wasn't a cheerful laugh, but something strange, unnerving, almost mocking. High-pitched and shrill, it started far away and gradually drew closer, before suddenly dropping to a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the ground beneath us. It was as though the earth itself was shaking with the sound. Then it stopped. A chilling silence followed, but not for long. The laughter began again, this time louder, more forceful, accompanied by an eerie rumbling that seemed to distort the very air around us. We were frozen in fear, not knowing whether to run or confront whatever it was. The sound seemed to come from all directions, each time louder and more distorted, until the ground itself seemed to shake with each unnatural cackle. It wasn't just the laugh, it was as if something was playing with us, toying with our very sanity. Suddenly, without warning, a violent storm descended upon us. Winds howled through the trees, and rain began to pour in torrents, as though the heavens themselves had opened. The storm arrived in a flash with no warning, no gradual buildup. It was as if the weather had been waiting for that exact moment to unleash its fury. We scrambled to secure our tents, but the wind was relentless, bending the trees and tearing through the camp. Then, in an instant, it happened. Our tent, which had been securely staked into the ground, was ripped apart. The stakes that had been hammered deeply into the soil were pulled out with terrifying force, as if some invisible hand had reached down and torn the very fabric of our shelter. We were left standing there, drenched in the torrential rain, trying to hold onto our gear as the wind ripped it away from us. It was as if something or someone was actively trying to destroy our camp. We looked around, frantic, but there was nothing in sight. The laughter had stopped, replaced by the sound of the storm and the eerie rustling of the trees. We could see nothing, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. It was as though the forest itself had come alive, and we were intruders in a place that didn't want us there. The storm continued to rage for what felt like hours, but eventually it subsided as quickly as it had come. The silence that followed was suffocating. We stood in the aftermath, soaking wet and shivering, looking at the shredded remnants of our tent and the camp that had been torn apart. But when we tried to gather our things and pack up, something was wrong. The ground beneath us was different. The stakes that had been pulled from the ground were nowhere to be found, as if they had been swallowed up by the earth itself. Our tent had been shredded, the poles snapped in half. It was as though an unseen force had systematically dismantled everything we had set up, leaving us in a state of shock and confusion. We quickly packed up and fled the campsite, the feeling of being pursued never leaving us. The forest, which had seemed so peaceful when we first arrived, now felt like a dark and foreboding place, as though we had awoken something that was not meant to be disturbed. The unsettling laughter, the sudden storm, and the destruction of our camp, all of it pointed to something beyond our understanding. As we left the forest, still shaken by the night's events, we couldn't help but question what had truly happened. Was it just a freak storm? An odd combination of weather patterns and strange coincidences? Or was there something more, something supernatural at play? The laughter, the strange forces that tore apart our tent, and the unsettling silence afterward left us with more questions than answers. In the weeks that followed, we tried to make sense of it. The rational part of us wanted to chalk it up to an odd storm and our heightened nerves, but deep down, we knew something was different about that night. There was a feeling in the air, a presence in the forest, that we couldn't explain. It was as though the forest itself had a consciousness, and we had crossed into a space where the usual rules of nature no longer applied. The event left me with a deep respect for the wilderness and a heightened awareness of how unpredictable nature can be. It reminded me that while we may think we understand the world around us, there are forces at play, whether natural or supernatural, that are beyond our control. We may never know exactly what happened that night, but it serves as a stark reminder that the wilderness is a place full of mysteries, some of which we may never fully understand. That experience has stayed with me, and every time I enter a forest, I remember the feeling of being watched, the eerie laughter, and the overwhelming sense that we are but small, fleeting beings in a much larger, unknown world. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 3: The Haunting Camping Experience in Zaleski State Forest. It was supposed to be just another typical college trip, an adventure with friends into the wild, to escape the pressures of school and embrace the quiet beauty of nature. I, along with a small group of students, decided to take a weekend trip to Zaleski State Forest in Ohio. The forest, known for its thick, untamed woods and mysterious reputation, seemed like the perfect place for a weekend getaway. Little did we know this trip would turn into a nightmare, and we'd experience something that none of us could explain. The first day was perfect. We arrived at the edge of the forest, the air crisp and fresh. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting golden light over the forest as we set up our campsite. Laughter filled the air as we gathered around the campfire, sharing stories, roasting marshmallows, and soaking in the beauty of the wild. The scent of pine and earth was thick in the air, a smell that seemed to remind us we were far from civilization. It felt like the world had slowed down, and we were at peace with it all. But as the night wore on, something began to feel off. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of birds, the buzz of insects, seemed to fade away. The fire crackled, but the air around us grew unnervingly still. There was an overwhelming silence, thick and heavy, as though the forest itself had stopped breathing. One of my friends, Emily, was the first to notice it. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She looked around nervously, as if expecting something to jump out from the shadows. At first I thought she was just being paranoid, but then I heard it too. Footsteps, faint, almost imperceptible, but there. It sounded like someone or something was moving just outside the ring of light cast by our fire. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone was circling us, watching us. We all fell silent, our eyes darting nervously between each other and the darkness beyond the firelight. The footsteps stopped. We could hear nothing for what seemed like an eternity, until suddenly a branch snapped in the distance, followed by a low growl, a sound that sent chills crawling down my spine. "Did anyone hear that?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We all nodded, fear written on our faces. Then came the whispers. Low, almost inaudible at first, but growing clearer with each passing minute. They weren't words we could understand, just guttural murmurs, as though the forest itself was speaking in a language older than time. The sounds were all around us, floating on the wind, wrapping around us like a cold, invisible hand. "I'm not imagining this," Josh said, his eyes wide with fear. "Something's out there." The air felt heavy, thick with an unnatural presence. None of us spoke, too terrified to even move. The fire flickered and cast strange shadows that danced like figures on the edge of the forest, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something, no, someone, was watching us. Suddenly I saw it, a shadow just beyond the trees. Something tall and humanoid, its outline barely visible in the dark. It stood still for a moment before it moved, vanishing into the dense underbrush. "Did you see that?" Emily gasped, her voice cracking. We were all on edge now, our minds racing with questions, but none of us dared to answer. "I think we should leave," Josh suggested quietly, his face pale. "Now." As the second night fell, the sense of dread grew stronger. The whispers from the night before had returned, louder this time, more insistent. They didn't sound human anymore. They sounded like something ancient, something that had been here long before we ever set foot in the forest. But it wasn't just the whispers. The footsteps were back too, closer now, moving in a pattern around us. It was as if they knew we were there, as if they were testing us, studying us. I heard someone breathe sharply, and I turned to see Mark, his eyes wide, staring into the trees. I think we're not alone," he said, barely able to speak. Then came the voices. This time they weren't whispers anymore. They were full, human-like voices, but they were distorted, like they were coming from behind a veil. "Leave. Now," one voice moaned. Another voice, deeper and more guttural, echoed, "You don't belong here." I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The chill in the air deepened and the sounds grew louder, as if the forest itself was alive and speaking to us. Suddenly we heard a loud crash, like something heavy had fallen in the woods. I grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the noise, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I reached the spot, there was nothing, just broken branches and an unnatural stillness. I turned to go back to the campsite, but I stopped dead in my tracks. There, just beyond the light of the fire, I saw it again, a shadowy figure, tall and thin, moving between the trees. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but its face, if it had one, was hidden in the darkness. It was watching us. It was waiting for us to make a move. I rushed back to the camp, heart racing, and found the group in a state of panic. They were all looking around, wide-eyed, but no one was speaking. We could all feel it, the presence of something ancient, something hungry. We tried to wait it out, but the longer we stayed, the more intense the feeling became. The wind howled through the trees, and we could hear the distant sounds of something large moving in the forest. Suddenly the fire flickered and died, leaving us in complete darkness. In that moment we could hear the unmistakable sound of twigs snapping, footsteps moving closer. But these weren't the soft, cautious steps from before. These were heavy, thudding steps, like something was charging straight at us. "We have to go," Emily said, her voice trembling with panic. "Now!" We packed up as quickly as we could, but when we turned to leave, we found that the path we had walked in on was completely blocked. Fallen trees, broken branches, and debris had been scattered across the trail, as if someone, or something, had deliberately trapped us inside. We looked around, frantic, and that's when we saw it. The shadowy figure, now closer than ever, standing at the edge of the camp. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything we could recognize. But it was real, and it was coming toward us. In a blind panic, we pushed through the trees, stumbling over rocks and roots as we made our way out of the forest. Behind us, we could hear the whispers growing louder, then fading into an eerie silence. The forest was alive, and it was not ready to let us go. By the time we reached the forest's edge, the sun had just begun to rise, casting a pale light on our path. We didn't look back. We couldn't. The memory of that night, of the terror we'd felt, lingered with us long after we left. It wasn't just the whispers, the footsteps, or the shadows. It was the feeling that something had been waiting for us in that forest, something that didn't want us there. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Was it the forest playing tricks on our minds, or was it something far more sinister? The locals talk about the Zaleski State Forest like it's cursed, and after that night, I can't help but wonder if there's some truth to those rumors. We never went back to Zaleski, and I don't think I ever will. Some places, I've learned, are better left unexplored. The forest holds its secrets, and I've learned the hard way that some things are best left undisturbed. Looking back, I realized that the events we experienced in Zaleski were more than just a series of strange occurrences. There was something profound about that night, a lesson in the limits of human understanding. We were just visitors in the ancient woods, and we were forced to reckon with the terrifying possibility that the forest itself was not as empty as it seemed. The forest, like all places with history, has its own stories. Whether they're ghost stories, folklore, or something deeper, they remind us of the unknown forces that lie beyond our understanding. Some places carry with them an energy, a presence, that can never be fully explained. And perhaps that's the scariest thing of all. As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here, it only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC Dark Timeless Creeps now and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the creeps are always waiting, and they never rest. iMoon,